In December of 2023, the USDA made a quiet decision that most Americans never heard about. It ruled that the beef product the entire country once knew as pink slime, ammonia-treated beef trimmings, spun through a centrifuge and sprayed with a gas to kill bacteria, can now be sold, labeled, and marketed as plain ground beef. No disclosure, no asterisk. Nothing on the package to tell you it's in there. This is the same product that was banned for human consumption in the European Union and Canada. The same product that, when ABC News exposed it in 2012, triggered a lawsuit for nearly $2 billion. And it can now legally sit in the package in your cart under 3 simple words: ground beef. That is one thing the label isn't telling you. There are more. I pulled the USDA recall database, the product of USA labeling rules, the ownership records of the companies that grind most of America's beef, and the certifications that actually mean something. 10 ground beef brands and labels you should skip, 4 that are actually real, traceable beef, from an animal you could theoretically point to. We go from lower concern to the most serious, and the number 1 entry is probably the exact package most families buy every single week. One fact to carry through all of it. A single pound of commodity ground beef can contain the mixed meat of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of different cattle, from multiple states and multiple countries, ground together in one facility. That is not a conspiracy. It is how the industrial grind works. And it is the root of nearly everything on this list. Let's get into it. Number 10. Great Value Ground Beef, Walmart. This is the default, the cheapest tube or tray in the case, bought on price, and at that price you are buying the least traceable beef in the store. Great Value Ground Beef is a commodity product. Walmart does not raise cattle. It buys ground beef from large processors, and the meat in any given package is aggregated from a supply chain built entirely around hitting the lowest possible cost per pound. That aggregation is the problem, because the USDA's December 2023 reclassification now allows lean, finely textured beef, pink slime, to be labeled simply as ground beef. A budget commodity product like this is exactly where you would expect to find it, with nothing on the label to confirm or deny it. Add the water retention and fat ratio management that industrial grinding relies on, and you have a product optimized for one number: price. The 80 cents you saved per pound came out of traceability, sourcing standards, and your ability to know what and how many animals are actually in the package. Cheap beef is not a bargain when you cannot find out what it is. Number 9. Kroger Ground Beef, Store Brand. Kroger is the largest traditional supermarket operator in the country, and its store-brand ground beef carries the quiet institutional trust that comes from a name people have shopped under their whole lives. That trust is doing work the sourcing does not necessarily earn. Like all major store-brand ground beef, Kroger's is ground and packed at high volume from commodity beef supplied by the large packers. The specific issue is the grind itself. Store-brand ground beef is typically produced in large batches, which means a single package pulls trim from many animals at once, and a contamination event in one animal's trim can be distributed across an enormous quantity of finished product. This is precisely the mechanism behind the recurring nationwide E. coli recalls that hit commodity ground beef year after year. It is not that Kroger is uniquely careless. It is that the industrial grind model concentrates risk, and the store brand sits directly inside that model while presenting the calm, trusted face of a familiar grocery name. Number 8. Market Side Butcher, Walmart's premium line. Market Side Butcher is Walmart's step-up line. The packaging that reads Butcher, organic, grass-fed, positioned to signal that this is the better, more considered choice for the shopper willing to pay more. The name is doing a lot of work, and the recall record is worth knowing before you trust it. In 2020, Lakeside Refrigerated Services recalled roughly 43,000 pounds of ground beef distributed to Walmart and other retailers over E. coli contamination, and the recalled products were sold specifically under the Market Side Butcher and Thomas Farms brand names, including the organic grass-fed lines. The butcher and organic grass-fed labeling did not prevent the contamination, because those labels describe how the cattle were fed and how the package was marketed, not the industrial grinding and distribution process the meat still moved through. A premium label on a commodity supply chain is still a commodity supply chain. The word butcher on the front implies a person, a shop, a single trusted source. What produced it was a large refrigerated packing facility shipping nationwide. Number 7. Tyson ground beef. Tyson is one of the big 4 meat packers that together control roughly 80% of the U.S. beef market. When you buy commodity ground beef, there is a strong chance it moved through Tyson or one of its 3 peers, regardless of the name on the front. Under its own label, Tyson sells ground beef built on that same industrial infrastructure. 2 things sit behind the Tyson name. First, Tyson has historically supplied beef trim to the producers of lean, finely textured beef. The Pink Slime pipeline runs directly through the big packers' trimming operations. Second, Tyson has been named as a defendant in federal antitrust litigation over alleged price fixing and supply manipulation in the meat industry, part of a broader pattern of legal scrutiny that the concentrated packing sector has drawn for years. This is a company whose scale is the entire point, and whose scale is exactly what makes the beef inside the package the aggregated, multi-source, minimally traceable product this list keeps returning to. The brand is large enough to set the standard. The standard is the problem. Number 6. Cargill ground beef. Cargill is another of the Big 4, one of the largest privately held companies in America, and one of the largest grinders of beef in the country, including a significant volume of the store-brand ground beef sold under names shoppers assume are independent. When you cannot identify who produced a supermarket's ground beef, Cargill is frequently the answer you were not given. Cargill's beef operations carry a long recall history, including large E. coli and other contamination recalls over the years that are a direct function of the volume it processes. The deeper issue is invisibility. Because Cargill grinds and supplies beef sold under many different retail labels, most people who eat Cargill beef have no idea they are eating it. There is no Cargill logo on the store brand tray. That opacity is the point of the private label model, and it is exactly what makes accountability so difficult in this category. You cannot make an informed choice about a producer whose name is deliberately kept off the product. The scale is enormous, the sourcing is aggregated, and the identity is hidden by design. Number 5. JBS and Swift ground beef. JBS is the largest meat processing company on the planet, the 4th of the Big 4 in the U.S. market, and it sells beef under labels including Swift. Most American shoppers have no idea that this cornerstone of the U.S. beef supply is owned by a Brazilian conglomerate, and that the conglomerate carries one of the most serious corporate corruption records in the industry. The controllers of JBS, the Batista brothers, were at the center of a massive corruption scandal in Brazil. The company's parent agreed to pay billions in penalties tied to bribery, and in the United States, J&F Investimentos, the Batista holding company, pleaded guilty to violating the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and paid a substantial criminal fine for bribing foreign officials. JBS has also been repeatedly linked to Amazon deforestation through its cattle supply chain, a documented environmental record that has drawn scrutiny from regulators and investors on multiple continents. This is the corporate entity behind a large share of the American beef in U.S. grocery stores. The flag on the packaging and the ownership on the balance sheet are telling 2 different stories. Number 4. Any ground beef labeled "Product of USA" before 2026. This one is not a brand, it is a phrase, and until very recently, it was one of the most misleading phrases in the entire meat case. For years, under USDA rules, ground beef could carry a "Product of USA" label even if the cattle were born and raised in another country, Brazil, Uruguay, Australia, Canada, as long as the meat was merely processed or repackaged at a facility inside the United States. The animal could have lived its entire life abroad. The label still said, "Product of USA." That means a shopper deliberately trying to buy American, to support domestic ranchers, to know where their food came from, could pay a premium for a product of USA package containing beef from cattle they were specifically trying not to buy. In March 2024, the USDA finalized a new rule to close this loophole, requiring that product of USA only appear on meat from animals born, raised, slaughtered, and processed in the United States, but it does not become mandatory until January 1st, 2026, which means for the entire history of this label up to that changeover, and for any older or non-compliant product, product of USA was a claim about a paperwork step, not about where the animal lived. The lesson outlasts the rule. A country of origin claim on a commodity product is only as trustworthy as the specific, verifiable sourcing behind it. Number 3. Imported grass-fed ground beef, sold as a health choice. Grass-fed is the fastest-growing claim in the beef case, and it is the one health-conscious shoppers reach for, specifically to buy better. Here is what most of them do not know. A large share of the grass-fed ground beef in American supermarkets is imported from Australia, New Zealand, Uruguay, and Brazil, and sold under brand names and packaging designed to read as clean, natural, and implicitly local. Grass-fed is a genuine improvement in how cattle are raised, but when it is combined with the product of USA labeling loophole from number 4, you get a product that can be raised abroad, ground and packed in the US, marketed with wholesome imagery, and sold at a premium to a shopper who believes they are supporting a domestic regenerative rancher. The Thomas Farms grass-fed line caught up in the 2020 Walmart E. coli recall is one example of imported supply grass-fed beef reaching U.S. shelves under a premium presentation. The claim on the front, grass-fed, may be true. The story the packaging tells about a local farm and a short supply chain frequently is not. You are paying the premium for the feed standard, while the traceability you thought you were also buying quietly is not part of the deal. Number 2. Ground beef containing BPI lean finely textured beef. Pink slime. Now we come back to where the video started, because this is the single clearest example of a label that no longer tells you the truth. Lean finely textured beef is made by taking fatty beef trimmings, the scraps left after cuts are made, the parts especially prone to bacterial contamination, heating them, spinning them in a centrifuge to separate the last bits of lean from the fat, and treating that lean paste with ammonia gas to kill pathogens. The industry calls it a safe, approved product. The USDA and FDA classify the ammonia as a processing aid rather than an additive, which is the technicality that keeps it off the ingredient list. Here is what matters for you as a shopper. This product is banned for human consumption in the European Union and Canada. 2 entire regulatory systems looked at the same process and decided it was not acceptable to sell to their citizens. In the United States, not only is it permitted, as of December 2023, it can be labeled simply as ground beef, with no separate disclosure that it is present. At the peak of the 2012 controversy, ABC News reported that roughly 70% of supermarket ground beef contained it. The producer, BPI, sued ABC for nearly $2 billion and settled in 2017 for a reported sum of at least $177 million. The reason this ranks at number 2 is not that the product will acutely harm you. The regulators who permit it dispute that. It is that the disclosure was removed. You are no longer told whether it is in the package, and 2 of America's closest peer nations decided their citizens should never eat it at all. Number 1. Standard commodity ground beef and the E. coli recall machine. The number 1 entry is the most common package in America. The plain tray or tube labeled ground beef or ground chuck, store brand or national. that most families buy every week without a second thought. It is number one because it combines every problem on this list into the single product people trust the most, precisely because it seems the most ordinary. Consider the recall record from just the last 2 years. In November 2024, Wolverine Packing Company recalled roughly 167,000 pounds of ground beef over E. coli contamination, with 15 people reported ill. In April 2024, the USDA issued a public health alert over ground beef from Greater Omaha Packing, potentially contaminated with E. coli 0157H7, the strain that can cause kidney failure and death. In December 2025, an Idaho producer recalled grass-fed ground beef over E. coli 026. These are not rare failures. They are a recurring feature of a system where, as established at the top of this video, a single pound of ground beef can blend the trim of dozens or hundreds of animals from multiple states and countries. One contaminated animal contaminates the entire batch, and the batch ships nationwide before testing catches it. If testing catches it. That is the real problem with commodity ground beef. Not one bad brand, but a structure that aggregates untraceable meat at massive scale, permits an ammonia-treated filler to hide under the same 3-word label, allowed foreign beef to wear a product of USA flag, and distributes the contamination risk of any single animal across an enormous population of eaters. The package looks like the most basic, honest food in the store. It is actually the most complex and least transparent thing in your cart, which is exactly why the fix is to stop buying beef you cannot trace. And here are the 4 ways to do that. Everything on the avoid list comes down to one missing thing: traceability. You cannot tell what animal, what farm, or what country your beef came from. So the 4 real options all solve the same problem in different ways. They let you know exactly what you are eating and where it came from. Best option number 4. Your local butcher or farmer's market ground beef. The most traceable beef in America is not a national brand at all. It is the ground beef from a real butcher shop or a farmer's market meat vendor who can tell you the farm, sometimes the specific herd, the meat came from. This is the original model, and it still works. The advantages are structural, not marketing. A local butcher typically grinds in small batches from a small number of animals, which means a single package is not blending the trim of hundreds of cattle from 4 countries, collapsing the exact contamination concentration problem that drives the national recalls. You can ask where the cattle were raised, how they were fed, and whether antibiotics or hormones were used, and get a real answer from a person who is accountable to you as a repeat customer. Ask 3 questions. Where was this raised? Is it grass-fed and grass-finished? When was it ground? A vendor who can answer all 3 is selling you something the entire avoid list cannot: a food with a known origin. It costs more per pound. What you are buying with that difference is the traceability that commodity beef deletes. Best option number 3. ButcherBox grass-fed ground beef. If you do not have a trusted local butcher, ButcherBox is the most accessible way to get traceable, standard verified beef delivered without a car trip. It is a subscription service built specifically around sourcing standards that the commodity system does not meet. ButcherBox's beef is 100% grass-fed and grass-finished, raised without added antibiotics or hormones. That grass-finished distinction matters and is worth understanding. A lot of grass-fed beef is grain-finished in a feedlot for the last months of the animal's life, which changes the fat profile the grass-fed label implied you were buying. Grass-finished means grass the whole way through. The sourcing is standardized across the supply, so you are not gambling on which anonymous packer produced this particular tray. The trade-off is that it is a subscription with delivery scheduling, and the per-pound cost is higher than commodity beef. What you get for it is a consistent, verified standard and a supply chain that is actually willing to tell you what it is, the opposite of the private label opacity at numbers 6 and 9. Best option number 2. Thousand Hills Lifetime Grazed 100% Grass-Fed. Thousand Hills is the answer for a shopper who wants a genuinely clean, traceable option they can buy at a regular grocery store. It is carried at Whole Foods and many natural and conventional retailers, which makes it far more practical than a subscription for most people. The key to Thousand Hills is the certification behind the claim. Their beef is 100% grass-fed and grass-finished and raised regeneratively on a network of family farms. And, critically, it carries third-party verification of those standards rather than relying on a self-applied front label word. This is the distinction that separates a real grass-fed brand from the imported grass-fed products. At number 3, not just the feed claim, but independent confirmation of the sourcing, the finishing, and the absence of added hormones and antibiotics. Look for the American Grass-Fed Association seal or equivalent third-party certification on beef like this. That certification requires grass-fed and grass-finished, no antibiotics or added hormones, and animals born and raised on American family farms. A claim with an audited certification behind it is a different category of product than a claim printed by a marketing department. Thousand Hills delivers the first kind, on a shelf you can actually reach. Best option number 1, Force of Nature Regenerative Grass-Fed Ground Beef. Force of Nature earns the top position by closing every gap on the avoid list at once: single-species sourcing, regenerative grass-fed and grass-finished standards, third-party verification, and a clean ingredient reality of one thing: beef. The product is 100% grass-fed and grass-finished, sourced through a regenerative agriculture model that the brand is built around and transparent about, raised without added antibiotics or hormones. There is no filler, no lean, finely textured beef, no ammonia-treated trim, no aggregated multi-country commodity supply hiding behind a generic label. The entire premise of the brand is the opposite of the commodity grind. It is increasingly available in the meat and freezer sections of mainstream grocery stores, which makes a genuinely regenerative product accessible in a way that used to require a specialty order. The price is higher than commodity beef, and it should be. You are paying for the actual cost of raising cattle on grass, on real land, with verified standards, from a source that tells you exactly what it is. If you take one thing from this video, it is this: on ground beef, the danger is not a single villain brand. It is the absence of traceability, and the label is designed around that absence. Ground beef can now legally contain pink slime with no disclosure. Product of USA was, until 2026, a claim about a paperwork step. Grass-fed can be imported and finished on grain. The commodity grind blends hundreds of animals into 1 pound and ships the risk nationwide. So change the question you ask at the meat case. Not, is this a good brand, but can this beef be traced to an animal? A local butcher, ButcherBox, Thousand Hills, and Force of Nature can all answer yes. The plain tray of commodity ground beef cannot, and now you know exactly why that matters.